Good day to you. Every single person who ever lives is living a history, right? And in terms of the development of mass media, the history that you are living is the history of the internet. We still don't know where the internet is going to take us in terms of all this media content that we've been accessing on legacy media, television, radio, newspapers, magazines, because all of that is on the internet now. So we're taking on a brand new subject today. In a way, we're moving away from legacy media as we take on chapter 10, which is all about the internet. The internet is the newest mass medium. It's really a diverse set of independent electronic networks. If you can envision it that way, they're independent, but they all come together in the way that they communicate. We also know that what's different about the internet is social media are a big part of the mix. The various platforms that come into play that people log on to and engage with others. And so in the midst of this subject today, we're going to try and transition out of legacy media into the new media, but we're also going to discuss how these two are interacting with each other because there's some interplay going on there as well. We do know, before we go into the rest of the subject matter today also, that the line between the consumer and the producer has been totally changed because of the internet. And what I mean by that is today people who go on the internet are prosumers. They are both consumers and they are producers. And that means that when you're typing every single keystroke on the internet, even a period, even a space bar, that is data that are being collected, data is plural, data that are being collected by Amazon and Google and Facebook and all these other companies, and then they are selling what you are creating. Facebook doesn't make anything. Twitter doesn't make anything. Instagram doesn't make anything. It's made by the people who are both consuming and producing that content. That makes the internet a very different medium. Now let's get into some of the history of the internet. It gets quite technical and gets beyond me, but I'll try and explain it the best as I can. So basically the internet is possible because of packet switching. Packet switching. Packet switching is a term that's used to refer to computers basically talking to each other. That's what the internet is, right? It's computers talking to each other. And it began in 1964. There was an engineer by the name of Paul Baran, B-A-R-A-N, in 1964. He was working for the U.S. government, for the military, and he was really interested in trying to design a communication system for our country that would survive a nuclear bomb. And that meant if one part of the country was taken down, that the whole internet system, as it would later become, it wasn't called the internet back then, that the whole communication system would not be dragged to the ground. So he invented this concept called packet switching. And what packet switching does, to put it in layperson's terms, is it cuts messages into little bits and pieces and then sends them out to whatever the easiest route is. It's like when you're driving and there's a detour because a train fell. You can't go that way, but you have other options that you can go. You can take another road, you can take a highway. And that's the way that packet switching works as well. Now, simultaneous to Paul Baran's work, you also had an engineer in England. His name was Donald Davies. And he was trying to design the same thing, but not for the military. And it was Davies actually who gave the term packet switching to this process of computers communicating with each other. Now let's talk about how this technology was developed. It was developed as a joint enterprise between the U.S. military, the Army that is, and universities. Can you believe that? So the Army was really interested in this technology and how it could help wartime efforts, but it didn't want to house the research for this new technology within the military. So they decided to use a series of universities, or a collection of universities, basically on the West Coast. UC Santa Barbara, for example. There was also one in Utah, but the rest were in California. And basically what happened was the Army developed this branch called ARPA, A-R-P-A, the Advanced Research Projects Agency. And this was the agency that later developed this technology, which became known as ARPANET. ARPANET, A-A-R-P-A, net. That was the first name for the internet. You can think of it that way. And each university represented a node. You know that term, right? You've probably heard node when you're talking about the internet at some point along the way. And nodes were these universities with these computers that would communicate with each other. But if the node of UCLA, which is where one of the nodes was, University of California, Los Angeles, if the communication was broken with the University of Utah, then the communication might go through Stanford, which is another university, or go through UC Santa Barbara as well. Once this idea of having a network based on computers talking to each other was established, and a bunch of other networks started to grow up, like the Aloha network. Now let's move to talking about the language of the internet, if you want to think of it that way. The language is TC/IP. I told you we were getting technical today, right? So TCP is the protocol used to provide a common set of rules for how computer networks will communicate with each other. Just like you have a common set of rules when you go to speak with somebody, those rules are defined by your language. Well, the language of the internet is TCP. So TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol. And this term was derived, we're talking now in the year 1973 when this was derived, and it was the idea to try and connect different networks. Like you have one network over here, well, just say, for example, to use today's present examples, you have Facebook. Does Facebook communicate with YouTube? It does. You can make it communicate with YouTube in some ways, but there has to be a common protocol for those two social media platforms to communicate. One of the very first commercial networks to employ the TCP protocol and establish itself as a commercial internet network was Quantum. Quantum was formed in 1983 using a personal computer by the name of the Commodore computer. And that company later became America Online, which today is just a vestige of its former self. It's a messaging service now, AOL, that's what I'm talking about. But it started out as Qualcomm. Now, we haven't gotten to texting yet, so let's talk about texting and direct messaging. That's the next development in the development of the internet. So interpersonal communication was a kind of communication that we talked about in the very beginning of the class, among others. We talked about small group communication, we talked about public communication, we talked about mass communication. Remember, interpersonal communication rather, is communication between two people. So what happens because of the internet is that context of two people having communication expands. It expands across the world to where now you have many interpersonal relationships one-on-one with people through email, through your social media platforms, and of course through texting. So there was another developer that was working in this field. His name was Ray Tomlinson. He was working in 1972 for ARPANET also, and he wrote what's known as a file transfer program. And a file transfer program allowed one email to be sent from one computer to another computer. And I just got to tell you, I was in graduate school at Penn State when this was happening. I can't tell you how elated everybody was in the class when they logged on to their first email account on a black and white screen. There was no web, there were no graphics, nothing. It was just strictly email. And to hit that send button and watch your message go from here to the Gateway, which was at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New England. And then it would go from there over to London or wherever you watch the lines of information as your message was being tracked. That's all gone now. That's really an old way of looking at the internet, but I wanted to try and describe you some of the living history that I went through. So email allowed the internet to take off because it introduced a new kind of communication, which was asynchronous communication, a kind of communication that many of you are using when you're taking classes in college now. Asynchronous means you don't have to both be speaking, both you and the receiver, at the same time. You can send a message and then they can retrieve it and respond when they want. And that made communication much more expansive than it had been before. One of the methods of communicating that was developed within texting and direct messaging is IM, instant messaging, or direct messaging as we call it today on Facebook and other social media platform services. Instant messaging requires a whole different computer language, and that's why instant messaging on Facebook Messenger cannot communicate with any other messengers like AOL. It's because they're separate languages. It's like putting Spanish and English together. Now let's talk about group communication, which was also affected by the internet. Now, because of listservs, like at ESU, and you get listservs, like you get the Warrior Report, I think that's what it's called, the Warrior Report, that comes out twice a week, 3 times a week. It's an example of a listserv. It's a mass message that's going out to people. But you also have what used to be known as poster discussions or billboard discussions, as they were also known, where people could go and post stuff on them, just like a physical billboard. This was also a new development in communication that was made possible because of the internet. Often you do have to subscribe to such groups. Often there is a moderator who controls what's going on. I belong to Rolling Stones groups. You can't just post anything you want on Facebook. There's a moderator that's got to approve that. Now let's talk about mass communication. I told you the internet is a big mix-up, right? It's got all these different technologies that are infusing itself into the internet, and mass communication is another one. Mass communication comes about because of the World Wide Web, the WWW. Until 1990, the internet was used for basically just email. If trying to use it for anything else was a challenge. Sending a photo, sending a video, listening to music, very, very difficult. Until Stanford researcher Doug Engelhardt, he invented the mouse. The mouse. Take a look at the mouse in the link that I sent to you today. Boy, what a jalopy that was. What a primitive thing that was. And he developed the mouse. And he also was the first to develop computers using spreadsheets and word processing documents. So we start to see the birth of Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. Those are what have taken control of the marketplace today. But now we're starting to see the internet and computers being used for much more expansive activities. Then along comes Ted Nelson. Ted Nelson was a researcher, and he's the one who invented hypertext links. Hypertext links. You know, links in an email, links on a web page, links on a social media platform that you can click and then you go somewhere else. And that brings in a whole new dimension of media consumption and production, because it's like you're drilling into the subject. It's much different from that old kind of linear reading the kind of linear form of communication that takes place when you're reading a chapter that we spoke about earlier. So he wrote the software for this program to get spreadsheets and processing documents going. And then along comes the person who is probably more than anybody else noted as the father of the internet, or the founder of the internet, if you prefer that. And he's from the UK, the United Kingdom. His name is Tim Berners-Lee. He has a hyphenated last name, Berners, Berners-Lee. And he had this Victorian era book, physical book. Victorian era was a long 100 years during Queen Victoria in the 1800s. It was called the Victorian era. And he had this book called Inquire Within and Everything. I think that's the name of the book. I may have it a little bit wrong, but it's Inquire Within Everything. And it gave him the idea, what if there was a thing that you could go to and inquire about anything you want, and it has the information? And that's the internet today, right? That's what search boxes are for. You can go find anything you want, theoretically. So he wrote a software program to achieve this. It was called Inquire. It was basically to go out and scope out the internet and find information. And this software program is what caused the internet to take off. It basically linked all of the information that computers had to the internet. So anybody who gets on the internet could go seek out information wherever that information is stored. And this protocol that he developed had three components to it. You will recognize them, I'm sure. The first one is a URL. A URL, which you may or may not know, stands for Uniform Resource Locator. This is basically the address of the content. Next up is HTTP. HTTP, which stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And this is the protocol for sending and receiving content. Just like Tomlinson wrote the protocol for sending email, the same thing had to be done for sending graphics and video. That's HTTP. And then you have HTML. Some of you probably know how to write HTML. HTML is Hypertext Markup Language. And this is the language that allows people to create web pages with links that you can drill down into. Now, it's very important that we know that Tim Berners-Lee had a philosophy of the internet that he wanted to sustain itself throughout its development. And that philosophy was he wanted to be decentralized. Decentralized. No central. Washington, D.C. should not be the headquarters. Amazon should not be the headquarters in Seattle. It should be spread out. And also, he wanted the internet to be free. He didn't want it to cost anything. Now, newspapers are one agency that probably really regrets that that's how people came to know the internet, because they have such a hard time selling their content on the web. But basically, when people get on the internet, they expect to get stuff for free, right? Even if they're paying for the service, once they're on the internet, they still expect to get stuff for free. And it hamstrings how mass media can monetize its content. Legacy media, how legacy media like TV and radio can sell movies and sell access to information on the internet today, because the expectation on the part of the audience is not going to go along with that, at least not right now. Then we get the first browser that was developed. The first browser was called Mosaic. It used to have an icon of a spinning globe. I remember seeing the ESU computer lab students sitting there like this, waiting for their information. They might have Googled what's the weather, and Mosaic would be spinning and spinning, and eventually it would deliver, but things were so slow at that time. That was later replaced by Netscape, which was the next popular browser, and Netscape then went away, and Google and Bing and Safari, that's what has taken ascendancy over those previous search engines and browsers. All right, so now let's talk about blogs. Blogs are very common. Maybe some of you in the class have blogs. A blog is a term that's short for weblog. That's where that word comes from. Blog comes from weblog. It's kind of a throwback to magazines or even keeping diaries, really. And it's about the idea that Tim Berners-Lee wanted people not only to be able to find documents, but to create documents, to allow people to be able to create documents so that there can be discourse amongst people about really important issues. Like right now, people are talking about the gunsling in Texas, and they're doing that largely on the internet. I mean, whether you like what's being said or don't like what's being said, this is the idea behind the blog, and it also paves the way for people to create content like they do on TikTok today and make money off it. It's all about not just accessing information from Tim Berners-Lee, it's also about creating. That's what makes a person a prosumer, about producing and consuming. Let's move now to podcasts and streaming, also made possible because of the internet. So basically, YouTube and Facebook Live have opened up live streaming, as well as TikTok does that as well. But this was something that was brand new and had to be developed. And basically, it allowed for the release of information according to the timing of the consumer. You don't have to accept the information just when it's being broadcast anymore, just when it's being released, or when a CD drops, as the way that people speak about songs that drop today. It's not about that on the internet. It's about you being able to go on when you want, because podcasts store the information. And when you access the information, it's streamed, it's not broadcast, so you can retrieve it by simply going into another person's computer. And this also led to the concept of citizen journalism. You know, journalism was something that used to be taken up just by professionals, people who had been through 4 years of schooling, for example, people who had been out in the field working as reporters. They were the journalists. Today you have citizen journalists. That's why you have people recording video and showing police arresting others, and people recording video of massacres, people recording video of tornadoes coming through the area, people recording videos of everything, right? We live in a video recording society. It's so easy to be captured on video today. And what it has opened up is the average person can be a journalist now. The average person can post something, can write something, can get it on the internet, and if it gets seen, they're in effect a journalist. Now let's talk about social media. Social media, this is where we have user-generated content. User-generated content in the form of comments, tagging, and social networking, which means that you can log on and look at other people and see who their, quote, friends are. You can see their network. That's what you can do on Facebook, right? So you not only see into their lives, the people who have decided to accept your friend request, but you're also seeing their list of contacts that they have. And this is called social networking. Social media provides for that. It also provides for customization. It allows you to change your profile. It allows you to create a whole different personality if you want. You can fish people, right? Phish if you want to. You can start crowdfunding. You can do all kinds of things on the internet that allows you to customize your communication like never before. And then this has brought up the whole concept amongst human beings of sharing our lives online. It's become a central part, in my view, unfortunately, of how people live. They're sharing all the time what they're doing. I was on Facebook this morning. I saw somebody say, "This hotel has terrible coffee." That was a comment that would have been kept between the person who is at the hotel and whoever they're staying with, or maybe their families. It wouldn't be an announcement for everybody else. And people assume that those kinds of announcements are important to others, or at least that's my assumption, that they think they're important to others. You can answer for yourself whether they are or not. Mark Zuckerberg, to move to him now, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, the metaverse. Meta is the company that now is the parent company of Facebook, and he's trying to push it towards the metaverse, right, where we have this whole alternative reality that we're living in that's made possible by the internet. Mark Zuckerberg, one of the youngest billionaires, he had this idea in his father's dentist office that he would be communicating, or the dentist office would be communicating with patients through an instant messaging service rather than an employee walking back and fetching the patient and bringing them back. It was a time saver. And that's what grew up into Facebook. Originally, he called it a walled garden. Think of that metaphor, a walled garden. So you decide who comes into your garden, right? And once you get inside, it's a beautiful place, or at least you can create it as a beautiful place full of colors and flowers, whatever you want to do, but you got to accept friend requests. Now, I know I'm talking about old school social media, talking about Facebook here, and most of you are on TikTok, Instagram. Some of you are on Snapchat. That tends to be discarded by people once they get past the age of 22, but these are closed media systems, or these are open media systems, whereas Facebook is a closed media system. I think now Instagram is a closed media system as well. In other words, you got to accept people before they can see your communication on Facebook and Instagram. But when it comes to Snapchat and TikTok, not the case. You can block people, but they're open, right? Anybody can get to your content. So what's going on with these various media platforms today? So Instagram, it's owned by Facebook. You probably already know that. You know a lot more about Instagram than I do. It was originally just a photo sharing network. It was founded by Mike Krieger and Kevin Systrom. Mike Krieger and Seven Systrom, but today it includes video, full frame photos, and filters. People love playing around with the filters. Again, that's part of the customization. And also social media celebrities have taken to social media, including Instagram, and they have really expanded their reach to the public, but also they've expanded the people's ability to reach celebrities through the internet. Then we have Snapchat. Snapchat has always had a hard time making money. It's not really used that much out of 18 to 22-year-olds. The original time length for a video that you could send has been lengthened. The concept of sending something that's then, disappears forever. If you're in a drunken moment, you get captured and it's not going to live forever. That's what Snapchat is all about. Although, as we all know, people can screenshot and still save what goes on Snap. Twitter was developed by 3 college dropouts, Evan Williams, Jack Dorsey, and Biz Stone. And it was originally designed to revolve around the question, what are you doing? But then Twitter became a direct source of information that's supposed to allow direct connection with celebrities. And then it became a news source, and then it became a political commentary source. And now Elon Musk has an offer on the table to purchase Twitter because, at least in his words, Twitter put restrictions on quote-unquote free speech that he wants to see lifted, and he sees potential for it in other ways. I'll leave you to decide whether that's a good thing or not. We also, because of the internet, look at all these things we have because of the internet. We also have mobile apps. Apps are a big part of how we talk online. You want to do anything, you need an app today, it seems. Businesses almost demand that you get an app, and that's come about because of the internet. We also have video games. That's, the internet. It's almost impossible for many people today to realize because it's always been this way for young people. Video gaming was a private enterprise. It took place in your home. You did it on one computer in your room. Now the internet allows computers to communicate with each other, and so gaming has expanded across the world. We're going to spend a lot more time on video gaming in our next class because that's our next chapter. So now let's move to a broader discussion of the internet and society. The internet and society. So the internet allows people to take control of the internet for themselves to a certain extent. You don't need to rely on a minimal number of producers like you did in television or radio to get your stuff produced and then distributed. You can do your own stuff on YouTube or whatever platform you choose, Facebook Live. And yet the internet is still dominated by big commercial companies like Facebook and Google, the 2 biggest companies out there. The idea of cyberspace is a concept that we talk about quite a bit. Cyber actually comes from the Greek word kybernet, meaning pilot. And that's what cyberspace is all about, pilot. It's about piloting your way through this new reality that exists out there. It's a non-physical space that you can exist in. And many people do, especially video gamers are in that space all day long. Now let's talk about some of the issues that have to do with the internet and society that we are still struggling with, one of which is the digital divide. The digital divide refers to the people on one side of the line versus people on the other side. On the one side of the line, you have people who get high-speed internet, they get easy access to the internet, they get internet for free. Like you're on that side. If you're a university student, I got to tell you, you get super high speeds at ESU, you get free access. It's not really free, it's part of your tuition, but you don't have to pay on a monthly basis. There's that side, but then there are people who are living in rural areas, people who are living in urban areas. People don't have the income to purchase internet service from a cable company. And so those people are going to the public library. Those people are using their phones until their data runs out. That is the digital divide. We have a divide in this country between the haves and the have-nots when it comes to the internet. Another controversy is digital media. Digital media has allowed a lot of content to be produced and shared easily with children, among others. Content that was not previously available, like pornography or like drug usage, or really the whole dark web. The dark web where you can go on, you can hire an assassin, or you can buy an army tank, or you can do all kinds of things that are not going to be discovered, at least you think they are. So the conflicts over the digital media today are revolving in many cases around how should the internet be restricted, if at all, so that this information doesn't make its way out. So this brings us now to bringing up the end of the lecture by talking about the concept of convergence. Convergence is where everything is coming together. That's what that term means, right? And convergence is, in this context, is about legacy media, radio, TV, newspapers, film, converging with newer media, internet, social media platforms, blogs, podcasts. How are the two meeting? How are they doing? So television doesn't want its content to be available for free. It's used to selling it for advertising, right? So TV is something you have to pay for through Hulu and all these other services that are available, Disney and whatnot. But people are still finding ways to get access to television shows because the internet has those shows. And the same is true for film and the rest. So I would say the relationship is much more uneasy on the part of the legacy media side than it is on the social media side. Which brings us to the final comment for today, which is everything is data today. Everything is data, 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 day-to-day, if you can think of it that way. Data allocation limits are a big obstacle to many people because they're on their phones all day long, and once that data runs out, they're stuck until they can get in a wireless zone. So data is being collected every single time. Every single time you're on the internet, no matter whether you're typing something or looking at it, those data are being collected and then sold. And I just want you to know that you're basically working for free because of the data that you're providing every single day of your lives. Think about that as you head into today.